In the high desert town of Red Willow, where the wind never seemed to rest and dust crept into every crack and corner, people noticed what set you apart long before they ever learned your name. Rebecca learned that early. She was 25 now, but some days felt no different from when she was 10, standing in the schoolyard, while boys tugged at her hair and girls laughed behind their hands. Her hair was thick and tightly curled, dark as mesquite bark after rain. It sprang back no matter how often she tried to tame it. The townsfolk called it wild, said it didn't belong on a proper white girl's head. They never said Apache out loud. They didn't need to. Her mother had been Apache quiet, soft-spoken, with the same curls Rebecca carried now. She'd died when Rebecca was 16, taken by a fever that came through Red Willow one winter, and never bothered to ask permission. All Rebecca had left of her was a faded shawl, a small medicine pouch she kept hidden, and that unruly hair everyone seemed to hate. Rebecca loved it anyway. It was the one part of her mother the world couldn't take. Red Willow was the kind of place where people watched from behind lace curtains and remembered slights longer than kindness. The railroad had passed them by years ago, and what remained was a town living on habit more than hope. Folks needed something or someone to look down on, and Rebecca made an easy target. She worked where she could, mending, washing, helping in kitchens when she was allowed, always polite, always quiet, never staying anywhere long enough to feel safe. On a gray morning in early fall, she stood near the hitching rail outside Mercer's general store, arms wrapped around herself, listening to a group of young men talk louder than they needed to. "Did you hear about Noah Blackhorse?" one of them said, spitting into the dirt. "Hard not to," another laughed. "Whole valley's heard about that lunatic. They say he's gone mad since his wife died. Drinks all day, yells at shadows. No one'll work for him, not for any money." Rebecca's stomach tightened. She knew the name. Everyone did. Noah Blackhorse owned the horse ranch out past Juniper Ridge, about 3 miles from town. His parents had built it by hand decades earlier, back when Apache families still held some ground without apology. People said the ranch had once been the pride of the valley, strong stock, good breeding, horses that sold for more than a man's yearly wages. That had been before tragedy hollowed it out. They said Noah barely came into town anymore, that his fences leaned, his corrals sat dirty, and his horses went half wild. Complaints had reached the sheriff. Neighbors muttered about smell and neglect. Someone had finally forced him to post a notice looking for help. Rebecca hadn't seen the notice herself, but she felt its weight now, hanging in the air between cruel smiles. One of the men glanced her way, eyes catching on her hair. A grin spread across his face. "Well," he drawled, "I reckon we finally found someone brave, or foolish enough to take that job." The others followed his gaze. Rebecca's pulse thudded in her ears. "Hey, Curls," another called. "Why don't you go clean up after the madman?" Laughter rolled through them, sharp and easy. She tried to step away, but one of the women from the boarding house, Leela, with her neat braids and sharp eyes, moved to block her path. "You should be grateful," Lila said sweetly. "It's honest work. Ain't that what you always say you want?" Rebecca swallowed. "I didn't say." "You will," Lila cut in. "Because if you don't go, we might just decide that hair of yours needs fixing." Her hand lifted, fingers opening and closing like scissors. The threat landed heavier than a slap. Rebecca's breath came shallow. That hair was more than hair. It was memory. It was the last thing that made her feel connected to someone who had loved her without condition. "I'll go," she said quietly. The laughter faltered, surprised. "Well, I'll be," one of the men said. "She's serious." They laughed again, louder this time, as if her fear was part of the entertainment. "Good luck," Lila called after her. Don't let him scare you too bad." Rebecca didn't answer. She turned away before they could see the sting in her eyes and walked home with her head down, boots crunching against gravel and dry weeds. That night, she packed what little she owned: 2 dresses, a shawl, a small bar of soap, and her mother's pouch tucked deep into her bag. She didn't sleep much. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw a man with wild eyes and a raised fist, heard stories of shouting and broken things. By dawn, the sky was pale and thin, stretched wide over the land. Rebecca set out on foot, the town shrinking behind her with every step. The road to Juniper Ridge was rough and uneven. The air smelled of sage and dry earth. After 2 miles, her legs ached and dust coated the hem of her dress. By the time the ranch came into view, her heart was pounding, not from the walk, but from fear. The place looked tired. Fences sagged where posts had rotted. The corral gate hung crooked on one hinge. Horses stood scattered across the pasture, ribs showing on some, manes unawed. A barn leaned slightly to one side. Its red paint faded to the color of old blood. Rebecca stopped at the edge of the yard. This was where they'd sent her, as a joke, as punishment. She drew in a steadying breath and smoothed her hair back, letting the curls fall where they would. If she was going to be judged, she would be judged as she was. The front door opened. A man stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, dark hair pulled back at the nape of his neck. His face was lined, not with age, but with something heavier, grief maybe, or exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch. He looked younger than the stories suggested, 30 perhaps. His eyes were dark and watchful, like someone used to expecting trouble. He studied her in silence. "What do you want?" he asked. Rebecca's voice shook, but she forced the words out. "My name is Rebecca. 2 came about the work." His gaze flicked briefly to her hair, then back to her face. There was no mockery in his eyes, only caution. "They sent you," he said. It wasn't a question. Yes. For a moment, she thought he would turn her away, that he'd laugh or shout, or confirm every ugly thing they said about him. Instead, he sighed, a long sound that seemed to come from deep in his chest. "You don't belong here," he said. Rebecca lifted her chin. "If I don't work out," she said carefully, "or if my hair bothers you, you can let me go. I won't argue you." He looked at her, then really looked. "No," he said at last, "I'm not like them." She blinked. "You can stay," he continued, "and while you're here, no one touches you. Not your hair, not anything else." The wind stirred the dust at their feet. Somewhere a horse snorted softly. Rebecca felt something loosen inside her chest just a little. "All right," she said. And with that, she stepped into the life that would change them both, though neither of them yet knew how. Rebecca learned quickly that silence could be louder than shouting. The first morning she worked at the ranch, Noah Blackhorse said almost nothing. He handed her a broom with a worn handle and pointed toward the barn. That was all. No instructions, no warnings. Just a nod, as if trusting her to understand what needed doing. The barn smelled of old hay, dust, and neglect. Cobwebs stretched from beam to beam. Manure had dried into hard ridges along the stalls, and the water troughs were filmed over with green. Rebecca tied her shawl around her waist, rolled up her sleeves, and set to work. Outside, Noah moved through the yard with slow, deliberate steps. He repaired a loose fence rail, then another. His hands were steady, practiced, though his shoulders carried a weight that didn't belong to physical labor alone. Every so often, he glanced toward the barn door, not to check her progress, but as if making sure she was still there. By midday, the sun sat high and unforgiving. Rebecca's back ached, and blisters had begun to rise on her palms, but she didn't stop. She worked the way she'd learned to survive quietly, thoroughly, without drawing attention. Noah watched from a distance, his expression unreadable. The town had not been kind to him since the day his wife died. She'd been buried on a low rise, beyond the cottonwoods, where the ground stayed soft in spring. After that, people said Noah changed, that he drank too much, that he talked to himself, that he raged at the horses and cursed the ski. None of them had bothered to ask what grief looked like to an Apache man who had already buried too much of his life. Grief to Noah had come as silence. He stopped going to town, let letters pile up unanswered, let fences sag and weeds choke the garden. Every sound in the house reminded him of what was gone: the scrape of a chair, the creak of floorboards, the echo of laughter that lived only in memory now. People filled the quiet with rumors. By the time the sheriff came knocking about complaints, Noah had learned not to care what names they used for him. Mad, savage, dangerous. Words were easy when you didn't have to live with their weight. Rebecca finished the barn before sundown. She stacked hay neatly, scrubbed the troughs until the water ran clear, and swept until the packed dirt floor showed again. When she stepped outside, dust clung to her dress, and curls escaped the ribbon at the nape of her neck. Noah stood by the porch watching. "You didn't leave," he said. "No, sir." "You could have." She met his gaze. "I said I'd work." He nodded once. "You can sleep inside tonight." Her eyes widened. "I don't want to trouble you." "You're not," he said shortly. "There's only one bed. You take it." "And you?" "I'll manage." That night, Rebecca lay awake beneath a thin quilt, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house. A floorboard creaked somewhere near the kitchen. A chair scraped softly. She imagined Noah settling down near the stove, making do without complaint. It unsettled her more than anger would have. At dawn, she woke to the smell of coffee and wood smoke. The kitchen was small but clean, light filtering through a single window. Noah sat at the table, a tin cup in his hands. "You cook?" he asked, glancing at the bread she'd begun kneading. "A little," she said, "if that's all right." He hesitated, then nodded. "Use what's there." That became their rhythm. Rebecca rose early, baked bread, and set a pot of pumpkin soup to simmer when the weather turned cool. She worked through the day mucking stalls, brushing horses, hauling water in 5-gallon buckets from the well. She learned their names, spoke to them softly, and noticed how they calmed under her hands. Noah noticed too. The horses stopped pacing. They ate better. Their coats began to shine again. He showed her how to set a fence post straight, how to spot a sick animal before it showed signs. His voice was low, steady, never raised. When she made a mistake, he corrected her without ridicule. "This isn't what they said you were," she blurted one evening before she could stop herself. He looked up from repairing a bridle. "What did they say?" "That you were angry, that you were dangerous." A corner of his mouth twitched, not quite a smile. "People talk." "They said you were mad." He considered that. "Maybe I was, for a while." She didn't push. She'd learned that silence could be a kindness too. Days passed, then weeks. The garden behind the house, long abandoned, began to change under Rebecca's care. She pulled weeds, turned soil, planted seeds salvaged from town. Green pushed through brown. Flowers followed. Sometimes Noah sat on the steps and watched her work, elbows resting on his knees. She hummed without realizing it, a soft tune her mother used to sing. It stirred something in him, something gentle and sharp all at once. "You're seeing ghosts," he told himself one evening. As the sun bled red along the horizon, Noah reached for the bottle he kept hidden beneath the sink. His fingers brushed glass. Rebecca saw him. She didn't shout, didn't scold. She just set down the dish she was drying and looked at him. "That won't help," she said quietly. His jaw tightened. You don't know that. I do, she said. I've watched it eat people alive. He laughed bitterly. Everyone thinks they know what's best for me. I'm not everyone. The words hung between them. He sat down heavily at the table, rubbing a hand over his face. The bottle stayed where it was. My wife used to love this place, he said after a long moment. Said the land listened if you treated it right. Rebecca sat across from him. I think it does. He looked at her then, not as a hired hand, not as a burden, but as a woman who saw the world in a way that reminded him of what he'd lost. They're wrong about you, he said. They're wrong about you too, she replied. Outside, the horses shifted softly in their stalls. The house felt less hollow than it had in years. For the first time since his wife's death, Noah Blackhorse slept through the night without reaching for the bottle or the memories it numbed. And in town, though they didn't know it yet, people had begun to notice something strange. The madman's ranch no longer looked like it was dying. By the third week, the ranch no longer felt like a place waiting to collapse. It wasn't sudden. Nothing truly good ever was. The change came the way dawn did, in the high desert slow, almost unnoticed at first, until one day you realized the dark had slipped away. Rebecca rose before first light every morning. The sky was usually pale blue when she stepped outside, the air cool enough to raise goose flesh along her arms. She liked that hour best, when the land felt honest and unjudging. She carried 2 5-gallon buckets from the well, careful not to spill a drop, and filled the troughs before the horses grew restless. They had begun to recognize her footsteps. A few nickered softly when they saw her, ears turning forward instead of pinning back like they once had. You're spoiled already, she told them with a smile, brushing down a gray mare whose ribs no longer showed so sharply. The barn smelled different now. Now clean hay, fresh water, leather instead of rot. Rebecca took pride in that. Pride was a quiet thing, but it settled deep. Inside the house, Noah listened to the rhythm of her work as he dressed. He heard the creak of the well handle, the low murmur of her voice to the animals, the scrape of boots on packed dirt. Sounds of life. Purpose. He hadn't realized how much he missed that. He ate breakfast at the table most mornings now. Rebecca baked bread every other day, shaping the loaves with practiced hands. She made pumpkin soup when the nights grew colder, stretching it with onions and whatever vegetables the garden could spare. The garden. Noah still found himself standing at the back door, staring at it, like a man seeing green for the first time. Where weeds once choked the earth, rows of beans climbed rough wooden stakes. Squash leaves spread wide and confident. Wildflowers bloomed along the fence line, their colors bold against the dust. Rebecca knelt among them, skirts gathered, curls pinned up loosely, fingers dark with soil. She treated the plants like they mattered. Once Noah asked, "Why bother with flowers?" Rebecca didn't look up. "Because the land remembers kindness," she said, "and because beauty's a kind of work too." He had no answer for that. As the ranch improved, so did Noah. He started riding the perimeter again, checking fence lines, counting stock. He repaired the north corral, replacing boards that had been split for years. When a trader passed through asking about horses, Noah surprised himself by negotiating instead of waving the man off. By the end of the week, he'd sold 2 young geldings for a fair price. Rebecca noticed the change in him, the way she noticed everything quietly. "You're smiling more," she said one evening as they ate. He paused, spoon halfway to his mouth. "Am I?" She nodded. "Just a little." He looked down embarrassed. "Don't spread it around." She laughed, soft and warm, and the sound stayed with him long after she'd gone to bed. That night, Noah took the chair near the stove again, like he always did. The bed was hers, he insisted on it, no matter how often she protested. "You work harder than I do," he told her once. That earns you a decent place to sleep. But sometimes, lying on the narrow cot with the fire dying low, Rebecca worried about him. She heard him shifting, the slow breath that carried weight behind it. She wondered how long a man could carry grief before it bent him too far. One evening, after a hard day repairing the western fence, Noah came in smelling faintly of whiskey. Rebecca noticed immediately. She didn't say anything at first. She served supper, watched him eat in silence. When he reached for the bottle again, she laid her hand bently over his. "Please don't," she said. He stiffened. "You don't get to tell me what." "I know," she interrupted, her voice steady. "I'm not trying to control you." "Then what are you doing?" "I'm asking you to stay," she said. "Right here. With me. Not in the past." The words cut deeper than anger ever could. He stared at her hand on his, small but firm. Slowly, he set the bottle down. "My wife used to sit where you're sitting," he said quietly. "She loved the mornings. Said the sun over Juniper Ridge was proof the world still wanted us." Rebecca listened, her hand unmoving. "When she died," he continued, "everything went quiet. I thought if I stayed angry I wouldn't have to feel how empty it was." Rebecca swallowed. "My mother used to say pain doesn't leave just because you shut the door. It waits." He looked at her then, really looked at her curls escaping their pins, at the honesty in her eyes. "You talk like someone twice your age," he said. She smiled sadly. "Life makes some lessons come early." They sat together long after the fire burned down, talking in low voices about loss, about memory, about the strange ways people survive what should have broken them. From that night on, Noah touched the bottle less and less. Work filled the hours where grief once lived. Purpose crowded out regret. The horses grew stronger. Buyers came back. Word began to spread that Black Horse stock was worth a look again. Rebecca helped keep the books, neat rows of numbers penciled carefully onto ledger paper. She had a head for order that Noah lacked, and he trusted her with it, without question. "You're part of this," he told her once. "You should know how it runs." The words warmed her more than praise ever had. In town, people began to notice. They whispered when Noah rode in. Taller now, steadier. They noticed the woman beside him. Curls unhidden, back straight. Some scoffed. Others frowned. "She won't last," someone said. "He'll turn on her," another predicted. But weeks passed. Then more. Rebecca didn't leave. Instead, the ranch began to breathe again. On a late afternoon washed in gold, Noah watched her from the porch as she watered the garden. She paused, resting her hands on her hips, surveying her work with quiet satisfaction. For the first time since his wife's death, Noah felt something loosen in his chest that wasn't pain. Hope, he realized, was not loud. It was the sound of water soaking into dry ground. Autumn settled in around Juniper Ridge the way it always did. Quiet at first, then all at once. Nights grew sharp with cold, and the wind carried the smell of frost down from the higher ground. Rebecca pulled her shawl tighter when she stepped outside in the mornings, breath turning white as she crossed the yard. Noah noticed things like that now. He noticed when her hands grew red from the cold and left a pair of gloves on the kitchen table without comment. He noticed when she favored her left shoulder after a long day, hauling feed, and quietly took over the heavier work the next morning. He noticed because he was paying attention again, and attention had a way of bringing the past closer than a man sometimes wanted. The garden was nearly done for the season. Squash lay heavy on the vines, pumpkins round and bright against dark soil. Rebecca knelt to cut the last of the herbs, tying them in bundles to dry near the stove. "My wife planted sage," Noah said suddenly. Rebecca looked up, startled by the sound of his voice breaking the silence. He stood a few feet away, hands shoved into his coat pockets. She said it kept bad dreams away. Rebecca nodded slowly. My mother believed the same. They shared a quiet smile, the kind that came from knowing something without having to explain it. That night, after supper, the wind rose hard and restless. It rattled the windows and pushed smoke back down the chimney. Noah added another log to the stove and sat heavily in the chair across from Rebecca. He reached for the bottle again. Rebecca felt her chest tighten. She didn't stop him this time, not right away. She waited until he had poured a finger of whiskey into his cup, and then spoke, her voice calm but firm. Noah, she said, tell me about her. His hand froze. Tell you what? He asked, though he knew exactly what she meant. About your wife, Rebecca said. Not how she died, who she was. The cup trembled slightly as he set it down. She laughed at everything, he said after a long moment. Even me. Especially me. She said I took life too seriously. A faint smile crossed his face, gone as quickly as it came. She loved horses that other folks said were too stubborn, said they just needed patience. Rebecca listened without interrupting, her hands folded in her lap. When she got sick, he continued, I thought I could fix it. Thought work would keep it away. But death doesn't care how hard you labor. Silence settled between them, thick but not uncomfortable. I started drinking after, he admitted, not because it hurt less, because it helped me feel nothing at all. Rebecca stood and crossed the room, placing a gentle hand over his. Feeling nothing isn't the same as healing. He looked up at her, eyes dark and tired. And what would you know about healing? She hesitated, then reached up and loosened the ribbon holding her hair back. The curls spilled free around her shoulders, wild and unapologetic. My mother used to brush my hair every night, she said softly, said it was a gift from her people. When she died, everyone told me to cut it, said it made me look strange, less acceptable. Noah watched, saying nothing. I thought about it, Rebecca went on, more times than I can count. It would have made my life easier. She swallowed. But then it would have been like losing her twice. Tears stung her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I learned something, she said. Pain doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means you love deeply. Noah's chest tightened. He'd spent so long thinking his grief was a weakness, a flaw that made him unfit for the world. You make it sound simple, he said. It isn't, Rebecca replied. But it's honest. He pushed the cup away, untouched. That night, Noah didn't drink. The next weeks brought change, steady and undeniable. Noah rose earlier, rode farther, stayed longer with the horses. He began keeping proper records again, tallying feed costs and breeding schedules. Rebecca helped where she could, her handwriting neat and precise. They worked side by side, comfortable in silence, finding an ease that neither had expected. But the town was watching. When Noah rode in to sell a mare that fetched nearly $800, men gathered at the edge of the street, pretending not to stare. When Rebecca walked beside him, curls uncovered, heads turned. Looks like the madman's found himself a miracle, someone muttered. Others weren't so kind. They whispered about how fast the ranch was turning around, about how an Apache man and a white girl with wild hair couldn't possibly be doing honest business. Envy crept in, where ridicule had once lived. Rebecca felt it when they passed. The looks, the low voice. Once she heard someone laugh behind her and felt the old instinct to shrink, to hide her face. She didn't, at least not at first. But one afternoon, as they stood near the feed store, a group of women began whispering loudly enough for her to hear. Guess all it takes is letting a savage run wild, one said. And a girl who doesn't know her place, another added. Rebecca's chest tightened. She turned away, tears blurring her vision, and walked quickly toward the hitching rail. Noah heard it. He turned slowly, his posture straightening in a way that drew attention without effort. "That's enough," he said, his voice low, but carrying. The women fell silent. He stepped forward. "You don't know her," he continued, "and you don't know me, so keep our names out of your mouths." No one answered. Rebecca stood frozen, heart pounding. That evening, back at the ranch, she finally broke. "I don't want to be the reason they hate you more," she said, slipping free. "Maybe I should." Noah cut her off gently. "No." He knelt in front of her, taking her hands. "You're not the reason, their fear is." She searched his face. "Why do you protect me?" He thought for a moment. "Because someone should have protected you a long time ago." The truth of it settled between them, heavy and undeniable. That night, the wind died down. The ranch lay quiet beneath a sky full of stars. Noah stood at the door, looking out over land that felt alive again. For the first time, he understood something his wife had once said. Love didn't erase grief. It taught you how to carry it, without letting it own you. Success has a way of changing how people look at you. By late fall, the Black Horse Ranch no longer sat on the edge of ruin. The fences stood straight. The corrals were clean. Horses moved with a strength and calm that buyers noticed the moment they stepped onto the land. Word spread, first in low voices, then louder, carried on the same wind that once hauled nothing but dust. Noah sold 6 horses before the first snow. Came good animals, well-trained, fetching prices he hadn't seen in years. One buyer from as far as 60 miles north paid nearly $1,000 for a bay mare, with steady eyes and strong legs. "You're back in the game," the man had said, shaking Noah's hand. Rebecca stood nearby, ledger tucked against her chest, cheeks flushed with pride. She hadn't said much, but her eyes shone. She knew every number in that book, every hour of labor that had gone into earning it. Back in town, people noticed the change and they didn't like it. The same mouths that once laughed now whispered. The same eyes that dismissed now narrowed with suspicion. "Too fast," someone said outside the saloon. "No way, that's clean," another replied. "Apache man and a girl like that? Something's wrong." Rebecca felt the shift before Noah did. It happened the day they walked down Main Street together. Rebecca's arm looped through his as they passed the general store. She heard the sudden hush, the way conversations stopped just long enough to sting. A man spat into the dirt near their feet. "Didn't know madness paid so well," he muttered. Rebecca's grip tightened on Noah's sleeve. Her face burned. She lowered her head, curls falling forward like a shield she'd used all her life. "Don't," Noah murmured, feeling it. "Keep walking." But the looks followed them. At the dry goods store, the clerk hesitated before taking their money. Outside the church, a group of women fell silent when Rebecca passed, eyes sharp with judgment. That night, Rebecca cried for the first time since coming to the ranch. She sat on the edge of the bed, shoulders shaking, trying to be quiet. Noah heard anyway. He stood in the doorway, helpless for a moment. He'd faced down men with knives and guns before. He'd buried his wife with his own hands. But tears left him unsure where to stand. "I thought I was stronger than this," she said, wiping her face. "I thought I'd learned how not to care." He sat beside her. "Caring doesn't mean you're weak." "They look at me like I don't belong anywhere," she whispered. "Like I never will." Noah's jaw tightened. He thought of the years he'd spent carrying the same feeling, wearing it like a second skin. "They don't get to decide that," he said. The next time it happened, he made sure they all heard him. It was a Saturday morning, the busiest day in town. Noah and Rebecca stood near the hitching rail when a group of men began laughing openly. "Hey, Black Horse," one called. "Heard you found yourself a good luck charm." Another snorted. "Or maybe she's got better tricks than sweeping and cooking." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Rebecca froze. Her hands flew up to her face, curls hiding her tears as she turned away. Noah stepped forward. "Enough," he said. The word cracked like a whip. The men fell quiet, surprised. He stood tall, shoulders squared, voice steady and clear. "You think my success comes from cheating? From her?" He gestured toward Rebecca, still trembling behind him. "That says more about you than it does about us." One man scoffed. "Come on, look at her." Noah turned fully then, anger sharp but controlled. "I am looking at her," he said. "I see a woman who works harder than anyone here. A woman who brought life back to land. You all wrote off as dead." Silence spread outward, thick and uncomfortable. He continued louder now. "You call her hair ugly? I call it beautiful. You call her strange? I call her kind. What's ugly is a town that can't stand to see two people rise without trying to drag them back down." Rebecca lowered her hands slowly, disbelief written across her face. Noah turned to her then, his voice softening, but still carrying. "Rebecca," he said, "you are not something to be ashamed of." He reached into his coat pocket, fingers brushing the small velvet box he'd carried for weeks, waiting for courage to catch up to intention. "I should have said this sooner," he went on, "but I won't wait anymore." He dropped to one knee in the dirt of Main Street. A gasp rippled through the crowd. "Will you marry me?" he asked. "Not because it'll silence them, but because I love you. Because this life we've built is real, and I want to protect it. With you." Time seemed to stop. Rebecca stared at him, heart pounding so hard she thought it might break free of her chest. Tears streamed down her face, but she was sobbing. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder, stronger, "Yes." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then someone clapped, slowly, hesitantly. Another joined in. Then another. The sound grew until it filled the street, applause breaking through years of cruelty and silence. Some looked ashamed. Others looked thoughtful. A few still looked bitter, but their voices were gone. Noah rose, pulling Rebecca into his arms. She clung to him, trembling, but standing tall. That night, back at the ranch, the stars burned bright against the cold sky. Rebecca rested her head against Noah's shoulder on the porch, listening to the horses shift in their stalls. "I was afraid," she admitted. "So was I," he said, "but some things are worth facing a whole town for." She smiled up at him. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said quietly. "I did." And for the first time in her life, Rebecca truly believed that she belonged exactly where she stood. Winter came early that year, slipping down from the mountains with little warning. Frost glazed the ground by mid-November, and the creek along Juniper Ridge ran thin and sharp beneath a skin of ice. The ranch settled into a quieter rhythm, one shaped by shorter days and longer nights. Rebecca adapted easily. She learned how to bank the stove so the fire lasted till morning. She patched quilts by lamplight and hung herbs from the rafters to dry. The house, once hollow and echoing, now carried warmth in its corners, soft laughter, the scrape of chairs, the steady comfort of shared meals. Noah watched it all with a kind of wonder. He never spoke aloud. The wedding was simple, just as Rebecca wanted. They stood in the small church at the edge of town, its white paint chipped and its pews worn smooth by generations of elbows and prayers. Snow dusted the steps outside, and the bell rang once, clear and bright. People came quietly at first. A few neighbors, the store clerk, the horse trader who'd done business fair and square. Then more followed. Some came out of curiosity, others out of guilt, a few out of genuine happiness. Rebecca wore a modest cream-colored dress she'd sewn herself. Her curls were pinned back loosely, just enough to keep them from her face, but she didn't hide them. She never would again. When Noah took her hands, his grip was steady. "I don't promise easy days," he said, voice low, but sure. "But I promise honesty, and protection, and a home." Rebecca smiled through tears. "I don't promise perfection," she replied, "but I promise to stay, to work, and to love you as you are." The minister spoke the words. Noah slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, his hands rough and warm. When they kissed, the church filled with quiet applause, not loud, not showy, but sincere. Outside, snow began to fall. Married life did not change their days so much as deepen them. Rebecca moved fully into the house, though little else shifted. She still rose early, still tended the horses and the garden when weather allowed. Noah still worked the land with care and patience. But now, there were small touches hand at her back. As she passed, a shared glance across the table that spoke of something settled and strong. The town adjusted slowly. People nodded instead of staring. Some offered apologies in awkward half-sentences. Others brought small gifts, bread, preserves, a knitted blanket left quietly on the porch. Not everyone changed, but enough did. On Christmas Eve, the ski hung low and heavy with snow. Rebecca had been tired all day, more than usual, and by nightfall the pains came sharp and steady. Noah didn't panic, though fear clawed at his chest. He wrapped her in blankets, saddled the horse, then stopped, realizing there was no time. The baby was coming whether he was ready or not. Rebecca gripped his hand, breathing through the pain, her face pale but determined. "You're doing fine," he told her, voice steady even as his heart raced. "You're stronger than this." She laughed weakly. "You always say that." "Because it's true." Hours passed, marked by the ticking of the clock and the crackle of the fire. When the baby finally arrived, his cry cut through the night, strong and distant. Alive. A son. Noah held the child with trembling hands, awe washing over him, like something holy. The boy's skin was warm, his fists clenched tight, as if already ready to face the world. Rebecca watched them, tears slipping down her temples. "He's beautiful," she whispered. "He is," Noah said, his voice breaking. "Just like you." They named him Samuel, after Noah's father, a man who had taught him that land and family were worth standing for, even when the world said otherwise. By morning, Christmas Day dawned clear and bright. Snow lay thick across the ranch, untouched and clean. The horses stood quietly in their stalls, steam rising from their backs. Smoke curled from the chimney, steady and sure. Noah stood at the window, holding his son, watching the sun crest over Juniper Ridge. For years he had thought happiness was something lost to him, buried alongside grief and memory. He'd been wrong. It hadn't been lost. It had been waiting. Rebecca rested in bed, curls spread across the pillow, her face peaceful in sleep. Noah looked at her and felt a gratitude so deep it left him breathless. She had come to him as a joke, as something meant to fail. Instead, she had brought life back to his land and to him. Later that day, neighbors came bearing food and quiet congratulations. The church bell rang once more. Laughter drifted across the snow, carried on the cold air. Rebecca stood by the window that evening, Samuel bundled in her arms, watching Noah walk the fence line one last time, before dark. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if you hadn't come here?" Noah asked when he returned. She smiled softly. "Sometimes. And I think," she said, "that some things grow best in places others have given up on." Noah reached for her hand, their fingers lacing together easily. Outside, the land lay still beneath the stars. Inside, the house was full. And in a world that had once laughed at them both, Rebecca and Noah Blackhorse had built something that would endure, not because it was perfect, but because it was true. What was meant to bloom always finds a way. Thank you for spending this time with Rebecca and Noah and walking their journey of courage, love, and belonging. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe, like, share, and leave a comment so I can continue creating even more meaningful stories for you. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.